Good evening, friends. A very warm welcome to the 41st edition of JHS Excellencia as we continue our journey on learning excellence. A very exciting topic we have with us today uh, on making smart SOPs, intelligent process design, and really privileged to have with us three GRC stalwarts and senior professionals who would be there on the panel and deliberate the topic for us, simplify it and make it easy for us to understand. Let me begin by introducing our experts on the panel today. I'll start with Sumana and her profile. If we can have the profile on the screen of Sumana, I'll quickly introduce her. Let me first start by thanking Sumana for joining the webinar today. Thanks a lot, Sumana, for taking the time out. Sumana Chakravarti is a seasoned finance professional and currently serving as the president and financial controller at Yes Bank. She carries with her nearly 2 decades of solid experience in financial reporting frameworks, including Indian GAAP, Ind AS, IFRS, and US GAAP, along with audit assurance and internal financial controls for banking and financial services institutions. She is a chartered accountant and an MCOM graduate from the University of Mumbai. She has extensive experience leading large and diverse teams across regional and international geographies. She was previously associated with KPMG for over 17 years, serving as an audit engagement partner for banks, NBFCs, private equity funds, and asset management companies. And in fact, my relationship with her started off at a banking client where we worked together on the subject of internal financial controls. Sumana has also completed international secondments with KPMG at United Kingdom, KPMG Spain, leading engagements focused on audits of internal controls over financial reporting. She is truly an expert on the subject of internal financial controls and thereby giving her access to high quality SOP making, development, refresh, etc. And I thought that she would be a perfect panelist for us today. Welcome, Sumana. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Zephyr sir.
No.
Always a
Uh,
pleasure to interact with JHS.
welcome to the panel. Our next guest and expert is Vijay Sachdeva. Vijay is again a leading light in the GRC space. He is an enterprising leader and risk management professional with over 2.5 decades of experience in governance, risk and compliance, risk management, cybersecurity, and forensics. He brings extensive expertise across consulting and industry domains, delivering strategic insights on governance and risk solutions. He has held leadership positions with firms like Haribhakti, BDO, as head of North India and partner risk advisory, along with industry roles at Indorama Corporation and Chambal Fertilizers, where he currently leads the governance and internal audit profile. He is also led several domestic and international risk management engagements, including SOX compliance assignments, where I had the privilege of working along with Vijay on a very complex SOX assignment years back in the Satyam era days, where we worked together to repair the SOX framework of Satyam post the fraud at Satyam. Vijay, by qualification, is a chartered accountant, CISA and LLB. Vijay is recognized for his leadership in risk advisory, internal audit, and governance practices, with extensive experience presenting before boards, audit committees, while leading key domestic and international risk management engagements. A warm welcome to you, Vijay, and thank you so much for joining the panel today.
Thank you, Zephyr. Pleasure connecting with you and JHS as always. Only one small update. Pleasure was all mine to work with you on the Satyam episode. So I take the side of the pleasure here.
Thank you. Thank you. Warm welcome, Vijay, once again. I move on to the third expert panelist and the key speaker at the panel, Mr. Jamal Chatriwala. Jamal is an experienced risk advisory professional, a colleague partner at JHS. He specializes in internal audit, enterprise risk management, internal financial controls implementation, concurrent audit, continuous monitoring, pre-IPO certifications, and brings together wealth of expertise in banking, insurance, manufacturing, and healthcare sectors. He's a chartered accountant, a certified process maturity assessor. Jamal, popularly in JHS circles, is known as Mr. Perfectionist. He leads several engagements that are complex in India, outside India, in geographies such as UK, Singapore, and USA. His expertise includes process excellence, SOP documentation, business process reengineering, managing BFSI operations. Like he had a stint of over a decade with Aditya Birla Group, managing the complex operations and the back offices there, and implemented Six Sigma methodologies. He's recognized for his leadership in risk management, process benchmarking, and operational excellence, with strong experience in IRDA compliance and enterprise-wide governance frameworks. Jamal, thank you for joining today. I now will move on to a brief introduction and context setting to the session today, and then hand it over to Deepika to moderate the session. So, good evening and a warm welcome to each one of you again today. Before we start off our deliberations, a quick 2-3 minute run up to the context that SOPs in this area, in this era of artificial intelligence, still remain very relevant to businesses, to CXOs, and to the boards. In the background of the regulatory changes that are happening in our country and globally, uh, there is a requirement of a critical document that evidences the entire workflow and process flow of the organization. So there has to be something beyond the risk and control metrics in the form of a standard operating procedure, which looks at automation, accuracy, faster processing time, and so forth, with key objectives that are being set. But let's begin with an honest question, that how many organizations and how many process owners and users actually use SOPs to their benefit, or it just remains a piece of paper in folders in drawers, just made one time. But making SOPs, even in that one time effort, requires so much of time, energies that teams put together, so much of creativity to create beautiful flowcharts and process narratives. But unfortunately, they are not used effectively for decision making in organizations, because somewhere they are not smart, they are not intelligent, and they don't get referred very often. It remains on a piece of paper. So the idea today is to stimulate the existing SOP framework, to refresh it, to make it smart, intelligent, aligned to artificial intelligence. And we are fortunate to have with us Somana, Vijay, and Jamal to bring the spirit and substance to this entire session in a very lucid manner. So with that, I will hand over the session now to my panelist and to the moderator, Deepika, to take it ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Sefa sir, for setting up the tone. This is really important to have the SOPs and get it implemented rather than having them in the cupboard. So, with that note, I would like to hand over the mic to Jamal sir for taking the key.
Thank you, Deepika. Good evening, everyone. I want to start by asking a simple question to everyone. When did you last read your organization SOP? And to the auditors in the session, when you read clients' SOPs, how much percent do you really understand? Can you start the slides?
Whoever wants to answer this question can raise their hand. We'll unmute.
See, if you had to think about it, if you have taken time to answer the question, then that's the exact reason why we are here today. Go to the next slide. Next slide. So I have reviewed SOPs during last 2 decades in NBFCs, insurance, large corporates, and I see the same problem everywhere. SOPs are once written and forgotten. So as per my experience, in 70% of the cases, accountability is not defined in the SOP. Every SOP mentions who is responsible for what to do, how to do, when to do, but person accountable is not defined in the SOP for every step. Second, as per my experience, even though SOP has decision gates, but the logic is not defined for the decision gates. The SOP says get approval, but does not mention the rules for approval, the condition for approval. Further, it does not say what happens if the approval is refused or is rejected. Third, which is very critical, either the KPIs are not captured in the SOP, or even if they are captured, KPI report is not made and the regular review doesn't happen. And lastly, in almost all the cases, most processes are largely manual, but nobody is asking the question before updating the SOP, where can we use AI? Yeah, go to the next slide. So all the issues that we discussed just now can be fixed using a smart SOP. So the smart SOP is not something which will solve all these issues, but it opens the door to continuous improvement. Even if you make a best SOP, the problem is that within a very short span of time, it will become outdated. That's the reason you need SOPs which opens the door to continuous improvement. So what makes a SOP smart? It should not be text heavy. It needs to have a flowchart with decision points. It should capture the actual logic. Something like if X happens, do Y. If Y fails, escalate to Z. Second key rule for a smart SOP is that it should be measurable. Something which cannot be measured, it cannot be reviewed, it cannot be monitored, and something which cannot be monitored or measured cannot be improved. So this is the binding principle for any SOP which you want it to improve continuously. A is for accountable. Every step there has to be a person who is accountable, not just a person who is responsible, but accountability needs to be defined. Especially in case of financial services, regulatory link is mandatory. So everybody who is reading the SOP, whether it's the auditor or it's a process owner, they should know that this control is critical and takes care of the regulatory requirement. Last is technology enabled. In today's time, if you see, AI can read your invoices, it can validate a PAN number, it can validate a GST number, it can check for unusual patterns, and a lot of things can happen. So AI has become an integrated part of the smart SOP. Next slide. So friends, now I want to show you a real, actual smart vendor payment authorization SOP. See, many times what happens is when you are reading SOP, till the end, you don't even come to know okay, who is the process owner. So this is the first precondition for a SOP. And this page, the slide, what you are seeing over here, SOP overview, this is the precondition before reading the SOP. The first thing you come to know is the process owner. Then it has a purpose, which is just a one-liner. Again, the important thing is the scope of the SOP. What it says over here, any payment above 5,000 rupees, whether it's domestic or international, and covers all the departments. Further, it excludes petty cash payments and salary payments. Now, before you start reading the SOP, one thing is very clear from this slide. You need to know what to do if anything goes wrong. Many times, even after reading the entire SOP, don't even come to know what to do. So in this case, it's clearly mentioned, if there is a flag for duplicate payment, immediately carry out the investigation and inform the finance manager. Next slide. SIPOC is the first tool I recommend to any organization or any person who wants to start a smart SOP program. Entire process can be mapped using SIPOC. So SIPOC stands for supplier, input, process, outputs, and customers. See, why does SIPOC matters? It helps to draw the boundary of the process. That's the first thing. Second thing is that in any process, the biggest challenge is that one department doesn't know what is required by the other department and why it is required. One team doesn't know what details are required by the another team and what is the use of that. So SIPOC will take care of this here. So let's read the SIPOC first here. So you can see that the vendor provides the invoice. Internal teams provide the purchase order, good receipt note, signed contract. Finance team runs the process. And now coming to the output. So output is your payment voucher, of course, your UTR number, counting entry, TDS deduction and certificate. But there is one more output which is highlighted in red, which is exception report. In the process, if suppose any exception is highlighted, then the report will go to the CFO immediately. Everything goes right, then the vendor gets paid. So in this one slide, you can see the entire end-to-end process. Yeah, go to the next slide. Now this is the heart of the SOP. So here I'll tell you 3 basic rules for making a good flowchart. The first is the decision gate. So you will find in this SOP, there are multiple process steps where the answer is either yes or no. And nobody can proceed in the process without answering those questions. So generally what we try is either these steps are automated or handled by the AI. So in this, you can see the step number 2, which is handled by AI. Step number 5 is handled by AI. And step number 6 is handled by the system. So in many SOPs you would have seen, it just captures what a person is supposed to do. But in this flowchart, we are capturing even what system is doing. So that it's very, very clear who is doing what. We are honest that even system will do these 5 things for us. Second rule is make a checker separation. And the third thing is use of the AI in the entire process and system. Go to the next slide. So whatever the checkpoints that we have seen in the previous slide are in detail mentioned over here. The flowchart is very minimal. It's not text heavy. So here you can see 5 checkpoints and the 5 areas where AI and system is involved. Something like three-way match, vendor verification, tax compliance. The AI can read the invoices. It can validate the PAN number and GST number, whether it's a duplicate invoice or not. Go to the next slide. So this is my most favorite tool which I use on the process improvement project, as well as before documenting SOP or before starting the audit also. This tool is called RACI. So RACI, R stands for responsible, A for accountable, C for consulted, I for informed. So every step on the left column, you can see like every step or every activity in the process, we have drawn a RACI chart. And the rule is that there could be multiple R, but A has to be 1. And the rule is If two people are accountable, then nobody is accountable. Believe me, friends, what happens, I have experience wherever in any step you find a challenge, the process is not working, lot of audit observations. In 75% of the cases I found is because accountability is not defined for that process at all. Go to the next slide. Yeah, this is the checklist. This slide, it's a quick reference card for all the roles in the entire process. And when I was working in the industry, this was a favorite slide. So this slide, shows each role in the SOP, and everybody has their own checklist, simple checklist, just 4 to 5 items, which is part of their role in the entire process, nothing more than that. And what we do, from this slide, we give a link to the detailed process. Just go to the next slide. So this slide is actually a financial delegation of authority. Authorization limits are defined. So you would have seen that authorization limits are defined in every SOP. But my experience is that this is the area which is frequently misdesigned. I tell you how actually. See, this particular table has all the 6 roles mentioned, L1 to L6. And it shows what is the limit for the single payment, what is the limit for the advance payment or urgent payment, monthly cumulative limits are there, whether the person can approve international payouts or not. And in the last column, it mentioned, apart from the person who will approve it, who else is supposed to sign it? Or who needs to be informed? So let's see the approval level L2, AP manager. He has the approval limit up to 2 lakh rupees. But if the amount is above 1 lakh of rupees, then the finance manager needs to co-sign it. That means nobody has the unlimited authority to sign the payout. Look at the L4. CFO has a limit of 25 lakhs. But if the voucher amount is above 1 lakh rupees, then managing director needs to be notified for the same. Yeah, go to the next slide. Initially, we had discussed if we need to design SOPs which will continuously improve. For that, we first need to know whether SOP is really working or not. And how do you know SOP is working? You need to define the KPIs for the same. So on this slide, you can see there are 8 KPIs are there. So each KPI has a definition, a time limit, a target is there, a person responsible is there. And in the last column, it mentions if a particular limit is breached, then whom to escalate or whom to intimate. So let's read the first line item of this here, invoice to payment time. So here the TAT is around 2 days, which is further divided into day 0, what to do, day 1, what to do, day 2, what to do. And even if the payout is not done by the 3rd day, then you need to inform the FM. Next is the duplicate payment, tolerance is 0. If anything goes wrong in this case, investigate immediately and inform the CFO. Go to the next slide. Now this is the best part of the SOP, which is about continuous improvement. See, on the previous slide, you have seen we have captured 8 KPIs. Now what needs to be done? Every month, a KPI report, along with all the exceptions which are highlighted by the AI or system or any individual, should be presented to the CFO or the finance head. From that, identify the top 3 problems, decide what to fix next, identify the solution, update the SOP, or adjust the AI rule if needed, train the team, finalize the SOP, and it keeps on improving continuously then. Go to the next slide. So for the internal auditors in the team and the managers in the session, this is the best slide I think you are going to love actually. Thing is that you have an exception report, you have a KPI report. So no manager in the world now can say he doesn't know if the process is not working and he's not aware of that here. Auditors can have a look at this report and they know what is not working. And before the auditor has come to your place, you have fixed all the issues. Go to the next slide. Next slide. Now I'll just summarize everything. So we have discussed multiple tools and methods in this SOP. The first was the SOP overview. Second, we discussed about the SIPOC. Third, we discussed the use of AI. Fourth, we use the flowchart in decision gates. 5, my favorite RACI tool. Then 6, smart delegation of authority. 7, KPIs and exception reporting. 8, role-based checklist. And 9 is the regulatory references. So if these 8 elements are there in your SOP, then it's called a smart SOP. With this, I want to close my presentation and hand over to Deepika. Thank you everybody very much for your time and patience.
Thank you so much, Jamal sir, and thank you so much for sharing those 8 checkpoints for the benefit of everyone. And today we have today's discussion will focus now on how organizations can make the static can go beyond the static documentation procedure. And to move the session ahead, we have with us our esteemed panelist, Mr. Vijay and Ms. Sumana. So without much ado, let's start the panel discussion. So to start with, my first question is to both of you. In most organizations, we see that the SOPs exist, but they do not consistently followed in the in a day-to-day life. Many times people just have it, but it's not followed. Or maybe so. In your experience, what actually makes an SOP effective in day-to-day execution rather than just a piece of paper?
After you, Sumana, please.
Okay. Thank you so much, Vijay. Look, it's not a very one-size-fits-all answer, but I have thought through about 3-4 basic characteristics of what we'll go into to make a good or a more effective SOP, the term that you use. The basic problem or the basic debate is not whether organizations have SOP. I think they do have SOPs. I think the real problem statement is whether the SOPs are designed to explain situations of real behavior or ideal behavior. And I'll explain with few examples, which are few relatable examples which we all sort of encounter day to day. It is assumed when an SOP is drawn, the management or the consultants, whoever are drawing that, they sort of assume that if the SOP is very clearly, precisely writing down the process, then the people will follow it. Now, and you may have backed it up with examples and so on, but real life, real day-to-day execution doesn't work like that. Real life, people want to optimize. They want to work at speed, they want convenience, and then there are target pressures, there are dependencies on others. So in such kind of dynamism, even if you have written it with the right, language, narrative, in a very simple order, even then, by design, it may not be a very matured SOP. So it's often better to actually build in these real world scenarios when one is designing the SOP. To give you an example, most SOPs we see will always define turnaround times. If this activity is not done, this escalation should be done. And those escalations may also be happening. And despite that, things would be aging and things would take their own course. How do you help that? You need to understand that people behavior does not change every time they get a trigger mail or a chaser mail. But what impacts people behavior? Consequence impacts. How their boss will perceive them impacts. So in such a scenario, maybe the SOP should define how the trigger should go to the next level or to the boss, so that it in some way, the lack of a better word, embarrasses the person who is supposed to execute the task. Depending on how critical the process or the SOP is, a carrots and sticks approach should also be followed. Like top defaulters or top overdue people, people causing overdue aging exceptions be flashed at some forum. Now, that's not necessarily the right sort of approach I would propose, but depending on how critical the SOP is or the processes, these could also be things which should be weaved in while designing an SOP. The other thing in today's day and age, I feel, is that SOPs have to be part of workflow. I think one of the things, Jamal, you only want to emphasize and more emphasizes, gone are the days where SOPs are just appendages or documents which are externally kept on a SharePoint or bound in a file. The system or the workflow itself needs to be the SOP execution. And I have seen even today's, there are very great examples, especially in certain human resource kinds of processes that I can think of. Every organization has processes around claiming reimbursements. Now, you will have a SOP which says that if the claim is filed by the employee or submitted by the employee within 7 days or 10 days, then it will be accepted. Else, default setting is it will be rejected. Now, what did you do? It is an SOP. You embedded as part of the workflow, as part of the DNA itself, to completely eliminate a scenario where people are submitting delayed claims. Likewise, clogging in attendances. This also in every organization, people have to clog in attendance. How does human resource measure it? They have a mechanism if somebody has not clocked in their minimum hours, clocked in the attendance timely, they will define escalations that the first order goes to the boss. Sometimes even if that doesn't work, then the most strictest order would be, okay, I'll put a hold on the salary. Now, in a way, what did you do? To insist that the SOP becomes enforceable, you develop the workflow. The SOP itself became a workflow in a way. So I think some of the enablers are extremely important to make SOPs effective, because it is really day-to-day real-time behavior as opposed to an appendage or a document. I'll pause, I think, Vijay. You go ahead.
Absolutely agree to Subarna. And if I have to put this point of effectiveness of SOPs, I would say that if you look at the user side or the organization side, I would say that there are 4 pillars for determining a SOP is effective or not effective. First will be for what purpose the SOP is made. There are some SOPs which are made for compliance, and there are some SOPs which are made to be strictly followed, and there are some SOPs which is a blend of both. Second pillar will be the endorsement. What is the tone at the top, and who's endorsing that SOP? A SOP coming from the CEO of the company or highly sticked upon by the CFO of the company, you will see the compliance levels to be very, very high. Third pillar will be discipline, which also comes from the culture of the organization. Same SOP, or if I may say, like SOP could be quite different in organization A or organization B. We have Sumana here, so if I may take the liberty of taking example that how a SOP will be adhered, say at a Yes Bank or a similar bank, could be much different from a SOP how it is adhered, say for a cooperative bank or a NBFC which is based out of Rajkot or Akola. The dimensions are completely different. The governance comes from the same RBI regulator. So that is what I mean to say that, what is the endorsement level of that SOP? Third pillar will be the exceptions handling. I think that is where we all mentioned about ICOFAR in our experiences, and so I take the litmus test of materiality assessment. So, for example, in IFC or an ICOFAR, we do a materiality assessment and say that 95% of my transactions are covered under the risk and controls parlance. I think that would be a good litmus test for a SOP. First, from a coverage point of view, that does my 95% of transactions, or Jamal said 75, or what is the threshold? Whatever is the threshold, are actually passing through the conveyor belt. The best example I can say for a SOP is a conveyor belt. Whatever you're producing, whether it's a product or service, it has to follow a conveyor belt process. Again, if I may take the example from a PFSI sector, financial services sector, how a CASA account is opened, if 95% is flowing through the standard SOPs, then the SOP is good and the adherence is good. Otherwise, the problem is either in the SOP or in the discipline, or the organization is on a pilot mode and risk and controls are being taken care of. So these are the three pillars, and fourth one is to say on exception handling, as I said. In the real life, there are always exceptions. If you can keep them 5%, 10%, SOPs will still do good. But if the rule of the business is that you have standard operating procedures for 50% cases and 50% are exceptions, or whatever number you see here, then we'll never have an effective SOP. So these are the four pillars, just as to sum up. The purpose of the SOP, why it is made, for compliance or for adherence. Second is endorsement, coming from where. Third is exception handling. And fourth and last one is the endorsement, as I mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you both for the valuable insights. I think we have clearly established that effective SOPs are not just a document, but operational behaviors embedded into daily execution. So with that, my next question is for Sumana. Moving on, let's shift the gear and move towards AI side. So as organizations adopt AI for approvals and monitoring, where do you see the real value versus where does it become risky or unreliable from the internal control perspective?
See, AI is going to be creating massive value insofar as we look at SOPs, which are more, which are documents which we use for undertaking day-to-day routine kind of activities. SOPs are meant for day-to-day functioning, not the core is not to always address outliers. So I actually feel AI will be of immense value there. But the important thing is that when organizations look at, bringing in the artificial intelligence while devising their SOP, they have to get the control checks or the control layers stacked right in the AI design. And I'll explain this with an example. If we look at controls, there are, at a very broad level, there are preventive controls, there are detective controls. Now, where we talk about detective controls, which are typically coming into play once a transaction has happened or once an event has happened, I think there something like artificial intelligence can give unparalleled value. Because artificial intelligence, if embedded correctly in the SOP workflow, it has the ability to scan 100% of the transactions, give you 100% of anomalies that happened, fraud patterns, non-compliances to the SOP or to the policies. In fact, why just AI? Even present day, there are many organizations which have developed bots, engines which run these bots to throw up these kind of outliers. That's in a way artificial intelligence that is already being used today. So things where the scale is large, like doing a lot of vendor payments, looking for duplicate transactions, looking for, I come from a banking setup. So looking for, policy exceptions when you're doing retail loans, because that's done at a grand scale. So wherever you're talking about detection mechanisms and controls in an SOP workflow, AI can be immensely contributing. Let's take another control layer, which is more like a decision support, where the SOP has a step where you have to now recommend whether I go ahead with a transaction or go ahead with this or not. There also, I believe AI can contribute at a very meaningful level, because what AI can do is look at your event trends of the past and give you a probable outcome, that this is how you had dealt with similar situations in the past. This is how you had approved certain vendor payments in the past. And you can use that. So it can give you a set of recommendations. So you can basically use that as a very key enabler in ultimately exercising the core decision. Where I would say AI should not be, used, or should not replace the human intervention, is where we are exercising, where the SOP comes to a step where you're exercising the final approval or the decision making, which is anytime we give an approval, whether it is a small value, large value, or whatever risk it may be addressing, you are making a calculated decision. There, I believe current day, the way the manual intervention or overlay works should continue. And I think even with a lot of AI boom, this aspect will continue to be there for the next half a decade or so, till we see, till we see any other major sort of milestones where decision making itself is being done by artificial intelligence. So if we look at the layering AI in this kind of control stack, definitely it would be of immense value in executing the SOP end to end.
Excellent point, Sumana. It's very clear that AI can significantly strengthen the controls. It can give you prompts, it can give you the basic ideas, but the human judgment and the human governance still remains critical when it comes to decision making. So, with that, my next question is to you, Vijay. In many companies, delegation of authority framework exists, but frequently bypassed and misunderstood. Why does this happen? And what makes delegation of authority actually work in real operation?
Very interesting. So if you look at delegation of authorities, I connected to my previous point about effectiveness of SOPs. I think the same litmus test applies there, because delegation of authority again is a very integral part of a SOP or as a standalone document. Now there again, how well these are being defined and what is the litmus test of transactions followed through it, or transactions which are bypassed and are part of exception handling. So that same test applies here, which is very crucial for the delegation of authorities. We have seen organizations where delegation of authorities finally roll up to a senior level approval, bypassing the whole process because of certain exceptions. And that is where the whole problem comes, that the SOP is not followed, the standard operating procedure is not followed, and it becomes exceptional case altogether. For example, if you look at say master creation, which is a very important thing for a customer, for a vendor, how an organization creates master. And there are various controls and checks which are part of the master creation process. And there's a approver, maker, reviewer for that. If the whole process is bypassed and because of said business exigencies, those masters have been approved, tomorrow you're sure to land up into situations where they could be tremendous risk. There could be tremendous control failures, both preventive or detective in nature, finally leading to exceptions handling or audit findings and so on. So that point again comes to the core of tone at the top and culture, which applies to SOP will be similarly for a delegation authority.
Very, very relevant insight, Vijay. Delegation framework succeeds only when the accountability, clarity, and the system-based enforcement, when they all work together, then the delegation of authority succeeds.
Exactly. Exactly. So what I'm trying to, as rightly said, so what I'm trying to say is that it's a whole machine. Organization works like a machine. Because somewhere, if you look at barring startups, which is a team of 5 people or 50 people, or say barring a MSME, which is still a family-run enterprise and so on, rest all organizations are interdependent, have risk controls, procedures to be followed. If not been done, the consequences could be very transactional or could be very humongous. And for that machine to follow, so recently there was a news that there's a big 3,000-ton machine which has been purchased for creating for building that metro between Ahmedabad and Mumbai. There's a picture in the news and so on. So just imagine if there is no SOP for running that heavy machinery. That is the significance of SOP, how we have to look at. Or if you look at some real life examples, let's cut aside corporate jobs just to spend 2 minutes on looking at the significance of SOPs. I think that should make us understand that what actually SOP is. For example, you have booked a blood test and you are undergoing certain ailments, and you have to use that blood test report for your further medical consultations. Now imagine that agency is not following any SOP. There is no right procedures defined for collection of a blood sample, transport of the blood sample, testing of the blood sample, and finally giving you a accurate report. Just imagine. Or you take an example of you are driving from your home to office, and there is no SOP which has been followed. Say by a traffic department or by the civic societies and so on. Take out the car and just put the car on the road. So unless we realize that SOPs have to take care of majority of transactions by discipline and as a thumb rule, this is pure business. We look at any particular industry or sector. You look at FMCG. If there is no SOP followed for how a food item has been made, how a juice has been packed, just imagine the kind of consequences. So because we look at SOPs only from commercial transactions point of view, the pitfalls are a wrong master creation, a wrong credit note being made, a delinquency in transaction. But the gist of the SOP comes in the organizations which is there for the basic business. Say suppose there is a FMCG company, there is a SOP to define how exactly that product is being made. Or say a pharma company, there is a SOP which is made exactly how to make paracetamol or exactly how to make a B complex solution. There comes the real significance of SOPs. What we have to understand is that the substance of the SOP has to take care of how the transactions have flown through a conveyor belt. If you look from pure services domain, I was talking to a friend in say PTM, or we have Sumana here. We're talking about some 10 million transactions per day. How it can happen without a specific SOP in a place? Say exceptions are 5% or exceptions are 30%. How do you manage unless there is a proper SOP, well laid out, well controlled, well oiled, to see that the machinery works as a conveyor belt? So that is what I'm trying to emphasize here.
In continuation to that, Vijay, I would like to ask, how can an organization, what is your opinion on it? How can an organization avoid over-controlling procedures? Because we see, like Sumana mentioned, that they prepare very detailed document. So how can an organization avoid over-controlling process through SOPs while still maintaining a strong balance between the governance and compliance?
When we say over-controlled, I would say that is the right control which is required. Because in my own concept, what I've been trying to mention here is that exception handling is where conscious decisions are required at senior levels of how those exceptions have been handled. For example, if we look at over control, so what are we trying to say? Eventually, who's the owner of the SOP? The owner of the SOP is a particular a promoter or a CEO or a board or a head of department or say a manager. But who is to follow that particular SOP? That SOP has to be followed by the person who's at the bottom of the pyramid. Now that person doesn't like anyone. That person doesn't want to work with anyone. He doesn't like his manager. He doesn't like his promoter. He doesn't like his CEO in an ideal world. At the same time, the last mile process executive also wants to exactly know what he or she is expected to do. So I would say that there is nothing like over control unless you make SOPs which are too rigid or looking like a very narrative long document and you make it disinteresting. So I would say that a disinteresting SOP is a fault by design, but there is nothing like over control. Management has to take conscious calls on what are the normal procedures and what are the exceptions. Again, so Manna here, if you look from banking point of view, what are the controls, risk procedures required for a CASA account opening or for say a home loan or say for a credit card operations? What will be the variety of exceptions and who will take the right calls on making those deviations? Rest everything has to be tight. Or you look at a manufacturing organization, how you manufacture a product or how your marketing team is working on that globally or pan India. It has to be silo tight. You create those exceptions for people to perform and deliver results for you, which is not you make the SOP tight for. A good oiled SOP takes care of those exceptions because market works on realities. So I would answer this question squarely as that unless there is a disinterested way of making SOP, it should require a good level of layout and controls and risk being defined there, along with exception handling procedures.
Now, would you like to add anything here?
I would just like to add that, see, there is, I mean, I agree to Vijay that there's nothing like a over controlling SOP document. See, management needs to realize that good governance is not about controlling every step or every activity in that SOP. What the SOP should definitely endeavor and very clearly define is what are the non-negotiables. And I will give a very banking, example. Maybe one banking, one non-banking. It should very clearly define that loan should not be given to an account which is a non-performing asset with your own bank. Very simple thing. Now it may pass through all the other SOP checks or the credit underwriting checks. But if it is still a non-performing asset with you in the last 1 year, 2 year, or 3 years, whatever the time limit you define, even if it passes everything, you can't approve the loan. Now that's a non-negotiable event. So the SOP needs to call that out very bold, underline. Let's take a pharma example, a company let's take the example of a company which makes medicines. Every medicine or every serum will have a formula defined. You have to take that much quantity, that much in the vial only. You cannot use any discretion over and above what is prescribed. How many ounces, how much water, how much powder to be mixed. Now that's a non-negotiable. So you have to define that very, very clearly. So if we go down the route of branding this as over control by management, then so be it. Though it sounds very negative, but then so be it, because that's a non-negotiable that should be clearly defined. However, what more often than not, management teams and sometimes the SOPs are also written by not the team members who are executing. It is actually written by somebody more seniorish or sometimes a bunch of consultants who have been recruited for it, who are not going to run that process end to end. So they get into that loop to define every little detail, in which what happens is you make it so rule based that you almost make it rigid and inflexible for the person who's undertaking that activity. So I think it's okay if we, through the SOP model, give a little bit flexibility for the person who's undertaking or performing the tasks in the SOP to reach the desired outcome. It's okay. They will figure out and adapt to the SOP in such a way that, the ultimate outcome is reached, and not make it too rigid and too inflexible. In which case in which case you're actually just giving guardrails, as opposed to a very, very rule based formula ki yehi karna hai or yehi dekhna hai. So it's okay to make it a little more, principle driven, but define the absolute non-negotiables, that when you come to this roadblock, this is a complete no. So you stop. I think I would like just look at it like that.
Exactly. So, yeah, exactly. So for the sake of using better words, let's call it using the quality parameters or the exception handling parameters, which takes care of the complete process, or the KRAs or the desired outcomes of a process.
Yes, very apt response from both of you. We also see because we review those policies we receive it from our clients, and we receive some 70-page document, sometimes it's 80-page document, and then we realize that it should be like Sumana mentioned, that it should have pointers which are really non-negotiable, rather than detailing each and every step there. So that the request which we receive mostly is that the SOP should be like that if a layman is reading it, he should be able to complete the procedure. So yeah, with that, let's move on to the future of SOPs. In the next 2, 3, 5 years, do you think SOPs will still exist as a structured document, or will they evolve into adaptive AI-driven execution system? Any one of you would like to?
Maybe this time you go ahead first.
Sure. So Deepika, I'll first I'd slightly modify your question for answering on my side. So if you say 3 to 5 years, I think the world, how it is changing, that the parameters have changed to something like 1 or 2 years as far as business rules are concerned. So if you look at the window of 1 to 2 years, I think it is all about the standard operating procedure. And when we say documented standard operating procedure, it means that it is well defined and well put in a form which is understood by the last mile. Now, that in form and substance may not exist in a so-called digital SOP. Rather, it has to be embodied only through the workflow. Otherwise, nobody has time and interest to read a document. One can read policies, one can read quality parameters, one can read KRAs, which is good. But something called a SOP document, even in a digital form, may not exist as early or as late as in 2 to 3 years, because the only way will be embedding it through the workflow system. That is what I would say is the future of SOP. And why I'm saying so, because while we all advocated about a strong SOP, a good SOP, I would like to avoid the word, but over-controlled SOP. But we all are not reading SOPs anymore since last 5 years. We are following it as either as a training material, or we are following it for the day-to-day operations for exception handling. Normal procedures are being taken care of through training or through controls and checks which the teams follow, or the systems are built into the systems. As borrowing the example from someone, you may have a complete credit appraisal process. Finally, if there is one tick which says that it's the account is NPA, that system will drive that all the checks and procedures will be followed, but the case cannot be approved. So coming back to the point, there is no called SOP document in even a digital form. It will be only working through embedding in the workflow systems. Over to you, Sumit.
Completely. I actually completely agree, endorse that view. It's not so much about, whether, to your question, Deepika, whether structured SOPs will exist or not. See, at a very procedural level, if we see, we may still have to keep those bound documents or archive documents in SharePoints from a governance, regulatory, or audit trail perspective. So that will still that may still continue, but the real question is, what form will the SOPs take? And I think the execution, the way the SOPs are being executed, that is where the AI enabled reengineering will really, master play out, because the workflow itself will be your SOP, which is going to prevent and deter and have those events where it will prompt you, the intelligence will prompt you whether to go ahead or not, will prompt you that, okay, in the last time you did a similar transaction or a similar process, this is what you did. It will give you all of those enablements in the workflow. So the SOP itself will take the color or the form of the workflow. I think that's really what we see as, that's what we should be really looking forward to embrace as a future. And I think that is all in for the good. I think that is really good, because manual overlay or manual intervention then in a real sense becomes most constructive, because you bring in the manual intelligence, the human intelligence, only to deal with something which is not the routine. I think that's really going to be very good use of even the human intelligence bit.
Yes, I completely agree to both of you. And I feel that the shift towards adaptive AI-assisted execution systems are very closer than many organizations can realize. Like which I mentioned, it can happen in next couple of years also, maybe a year or two. With that, moving on to the next question. From your experience, what is the most critical mistake organization makes when they started their SOP transformation journey?
Maybe I'll go ahead on this one. I think, and I will, this is something which is coming, which I quote out of my own individual experience. When I look at any implementations in the organization any new implementations or any change management in my own organization, I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make is when it comes to SOP or process redesigning, we give it the fillip or the character of a process documentation, where in essence, it is actually something which is human behavioral change. We have to sort of, enforce and labor SOP implementations or SOP adoptions as a human behavioral change. It's not really documenting clearly what you're doing, because ultimately you want humans who are performing that process to adopt that. So it really is about at their level, at their individual level of behavioral change on how they are going to be doing their day-to-day tasks. So many organizations believe this belief that they have, and a lot of consultants are engaged, a lot of specialists are engaged in making SOPs very watertight, or simplifying SOPs, or concising the SOP from an 80-pager to a 20-pager, all for the right reasons. But what we forget is, one, you cannot keep those kind of processes alienated from the teams which are ultimately going to perform the process. So you engage and bring into the foray those teams who are ultimately going to be responsible for adopting the process. And secondly, it is a behavioral change. So only having an SOP without having the right kind of I'll give you a good example. When organizations bring about an IT system, what do? We do user acceptance testing, which is an imperative step. Once UAT is, sorry, I went on mute accidentally. Once a UAT is not passed, you cannot go ahead with the system live. That's really the essence. Same is the case for SOPs. When we look for a SOP upgrade or enhancement or documentation, it has to go through the right UAT testing phase, which is the right kind of engagement of the teams who are going to adopt it into the process of documenting the SOP, the right kind of trainings being imparted to the teams. That when I write point number 1, it essentially means this is what you will do. When I mean point number 5, it essentially means you'll go back in the workflow. So I think if we introduce it without adopting these things as part of the strategy, it is bound to fail. It has to be a behavioral change. It has to be looked as a behavioral change project as opposed to a document keeping or a document upgrade process.
Vijay, would you like to add something?
Sure. So so the question is about mistakes around SOPs. I'll say, let me bifurcate this in the interest of audience into two buckets. One, if I may call, established, well-oiled, well-running organizations, and second is emerging organizations or small to mid-sized organizations. So for well-oiled, established organizations, I think one biggest mistake, if I can count, is to not to have sunset clause in the SOPs. SOPs continue for years, decades, but the business practices or the procedures, operating procedures have changed. So to give a good example here is that what we have introduced in our organization is that every SOP will have a sunset clause that this SOP has to expire unless been reviewed in a period of 1 or 2 years. That means that you bring back the SOP and the workflow together. They cannot go on different tracks, because that is where the train is not about to run on a track if SOPs and workflows are not talking to each other. So that is one mistake which I'd like to highlight, is not to have sunset clause in the SOPs, saying that the SOP will expire unless been reviewed in a span of maximum 2 years. That is what I would say for the established organizations, irrespective of size and scale and sectors, so to speak. And second, for emerging organizations, if I may say, which are small to mid-size, I think the biggest mistake is need for SOP. We don't realize the need of SOPs till we face a wall. I'll give an example. So the first example is from a company manufacturing into glass bottles. They supply to beverages companies, to alcohol companies, to perfume molds, and so on. And this company is 40-year-old, around 600 crore turnover, 3 plants, 500 people. And still the promoters or the management were saying, we don't need SOPs. We have policies, we have finance policies. Why do we need SOPs? Everything is set. And the hitting on the wall came when a well-seasoned right-hand person of the promoter as a CFO of 30 years faced a cancer attack. And that person had to go for his cancer treatment in 1 month. And the whole organization went through very turbulent times for next 6 months to 12 months, because everything was just not known of how to operate till that one head was there, was aligned to the promoter and who was aligned to the finance team. So that was hitting the wall. Second example, if I may say so, is it's very interesting one. So a couple of people came together and started a startup for e-commerce delivery. So on the logistics side, and they gained good size and scale to the extent of having a top line of nearly 5,000 crores, having built in a team of 10,000 delivery executives, delivering to 90% pin codes of the country. That is the size and scale I'm talking about. And then the promoters realized that now they cannot function as people who are at the helm of affairs. They need freedom. So for them, promoters, to get freedom from the nuts and bolts of the organization which has reached that size and scale, then they went for SOP, which has always been discussed with them since last 4 to 5 years. So that is where I'll say that the need for SOP is a calling which either you, when you hit a wall, or how proactive is for the emerging organizations. And for established organizations, SOPs have to expire, they have to die through a sunset clause unless been reviewed to ensure that workflows and SOPs are going on the same track.
Thank you, Vijay and Sumana, for your inputs. In the interest of time, I would like to open the stage for audience question. If we have. Okay, so I'll read it out for you. How do SOPs contribute to organizational transparency and governance practices? And what ways can SOPs enhance customer satisfaction and service delivery?
So, you like to highlight to whom, or maybe we and Sumana can take one by one if that makes it easy.
Vijay, you can take this.
Sumana, with due permission, can I take this one?
Yeah, absolutely, sir.
Yeah. So, so I think this question came somewhere in between and so on, but all the answers to this point, so for customer satisfaction, for process deliveries, everything again comes to the threshold of how much of the items of the conveyor belt, whether it is products or services, are following the set norms. As much as least as the exception handling, more of the quality parameters, and eventually making the customer, the team, the concerned departments more aligned, more easy, and more happier, if I may say so. So all the points which are there in the question qualify that as much as you do, you make your customers, your vendors, and your own team's life happier and better.
Sumana, would you like to add anything?
No, he summarized it well.
Okay. Do we have more questions?
Sir,
Do we have more questions?
I think someone from participant sides wants to say it is Mohammad Kashif. So Mohammad Kashif, if you want to speak anything.
They'll raise their hand.
Yeah.
Please. Mohammad Qasim, are you available?
So I think we can also go with, we know Jane's question. Is there any AI tool which we can draft smart SOPs?
Is there any AI tool which can help in drafting the SOPs? That's a question from audience.
That's a very, low-hanging fruit sort of a question. You can actually use Microsoft Copilot only if you use Microsoft. I mean, honestly, I would not be too tech savvy to quote you very nuanced AI tools for SOP drafting vis-a-vis some other activities. But the basic ones that are spoken of so much in the market, whether it's Copilot, whether ChatGPT, whether Claude, all of them will give you very, very well articulated step-by-step SOPs. Trust me. I've tried that actually in my own organization.
Fully endorse that. Paid subscriptions of Copilot works wonderfully. Just as example, adding to what someone has said.
Do we have more questions?
Yeah.
Very good. I think there's one more from Ashish. What is the one way which can make sure that SOPs and procedures followed on the ground are effective? And also want to know how we can make the automated which alarm before it is delayed. Sumana, would you like to take this one? Or maybe Vijay, would you like to take it?
I didn't get the last part of the question, but the first part was about how to make it more effective on the ground.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it that we spoke of earlier in today's session See, effective SOP, I think let's get this out of our minds that an effective SOP means only a well-written, simplified document. No, we are very away from that kind of world where it would mean only that. To make a SOP really, really effective in day-to-day running and day-to-day execution, futuristically, the SOP itself has to become the workflow. I will reiterate that. You have to bring in that systematization in the SOP itself, that the SOP no longer is just the bound hard copy document. It is the workflow which is guiding you from step one. If there are 10 steps in a process, it's guiding you from step one to step two to step three, step four, and it's intelligent enough to pause. It would not move to step 4 unless you have properly closed step 3. I think once it becomes that conveyor belt example which Vijay has emphasized in today's session, I think that itself is going to be an effective SOP of the future, that the SOP becomes the workflow. I missed the second part, the latter part of the question. If you could just repeat that, then I can take that maybe.
I think Deepika was linking that second part of the question again to effectiveness. So, adding to exactly what Samanna said, I think if we can correlate and have some benchmarks within us, how a standard SOP should operate, I think the best example, you may not like this example, but I really am very fond of, and to my experience, if there would have been a question that what is the best SOP adherence I've seen in my entire career span, I would not hesitate to quote this example. What I'm mentioning here is how SOPs are being followed in PSUs. That is the best example because PSUs see SOPs as rule books. There are no options, there are no alternatives. It is very, very rigidly, very, very specifically followed, and if needed, because of the market demand or customer demand or for the product or service which they're doing, then they go back and get the SOP changed. They don't make exception. So I think the best example I would say here, if you have to see benchmark, is how SOPs are being adhered in PSUs. And topping to that is the green sheet which they use. Every decision is documented. There is a note for approval which has been processed. There is no funny emails approval. There is proper documented. The mode could be over email, but there is a particularly documented green sheet which has been used in PSUs or in a lot of similar organizations, which is the note for approval, which I think will be the best example for effectiveness of adherence to SOPs. At the same time, ensuring if adherence is effective, the SOP automatically becomes effective or it gets updated. And the second best example, on a lighter note, if I may say, is how the sandwich wala makes sandwich in Bombay. He follows the exactly same procedure every time you ask him to make a vegetable sandwich or a vada pav or whatever is your choices. There is no documented SOP, but he has or she follows a very systematic conveyor belt approach to make a sandwich or a vada pav. So this would be the two best examples to say effectiveness and marriage of workflows and SOPs.
Because we are talking about SOP effectiveness, and we spoke in this session also a little bit on AI and SOPs, I stepped across a very interesting example. So everyone on this call, I'm sure, uses Google Maps, right? If you put point A to point B, Google Maps will show you the direction. Now, let's say on the direction, Google Maps is telling you that you have to take the third right turn after whatever kilometers. But you accidentally took the first right turn instead of waiting for the third one. What does Google Map do? It doesn't stick to that route. It reroutes. So if we now analogize that to a SOP and SOP becoming the workflow kind of a I think futuristically, if we talk about that Google Map rerouting example to a futuristic, effective SOP workflow kind of an environment, basically what we have to enable is not only does the SOP have to be the workflow, all these AI kind of integrations or engineerings that we bring about has to enable real-time feeding of data to that workflow, so that the SOP itself then prompts you that if you come across this kind of juncture, this is the new course of action and not the old course of action that you do. I think in a very true sense, the world in which we are foraying into, those would be really markers of having an effective SOP, where down the course, it tells you how to course correct. Rather than just saying, okay, now if you missed taking the third right and instead took the first right, you scrap it and you start all over again. No, that is a very rudimentary approach, very traditional approach. So I think a good effective SOP of the future would be something like that.
Okay, so we have got very interesting question. Is it appropriate for the head of audit to sign off the SOP? Would that create a conflict of interest, considering audit is expected to independently review the effectiveness of the process and controls? So the effectiveness we were discussing, in continuation to that only we have this question. So is it okay for audit head to sign the SOP? Maybe Sumana, you would like to add here.
Look, I mean, if you're going to, and I'll be very careful with the terms that we are using here. Audit always comes as a third line function. SOPs are something which line 1 and line 2, first and second line of defenses would have SOPs. Audit would also have SOPs, but that would be SOPs on how to audit, their own SOPs. Now, when the SOP is getting drafted, if the audit folks want to be part of that forum more as a mute sort of observer, or just give their suggestions from the past kind of observations they have seen or the hot topic trends they are seeing, I think there is no harm in audit being part of some of these forums. But when it comes to finally signing off as one of the approvers to the SOP, I think there is clear conflict there, because then it would sort of impair the moment you put the auditor to sign that this is the way I am going to run this process or this SOP. The conflict is very, very clear out there. So they can't be an approver, or they can't even be a recommender. But what they can do is, of course, because audit themselves sit on a vast data pool of intelligence, the findings that they have got time over a period of time, they can definitely feed those findings to the line 1 and the line 2 functions, so that those things get factored in when a SOP is being upgraded or redesigned the next time. But not formally approving it. Definitely not, I would say.
I'd like to add to what Sumanna said. So we are talking about SOP, and the whole 1 hour we spent about SOP's effectiveness and the adherence and exception handling. So I think the very simple, straight answer would be the SOP should be signed off by the process owner or by the concerned department, because that is only where you get the ownership. That is where you'll ensure that the workflows and the SOP are going hand by hand. So the straight answer is the process owner, the department head, or as matter of protocol management, so to say, should sign off. And speaking from the line of defense, it should be strictly not signed by internal auditor, or I would even suggest for a second line, because then you will hesitate and you cannot have audit findings on a operating procedures, including the exceptions which you have defined there. So I would say it should be only first line of defense, and it should be also the person identified should be the process owner or the department head squarely. And without that, the ownership is not there of the SOP.
Very well put, Vijay and Sumana. There are a few more questions which, in the interest of time, we are not able to take them now, but definitely rest assured, we will reach out to our speakers and via email, we will share the answers to these questions. So, yeah, with that note, I would like to, as we conclude the JHS Excellencia episode 41, on marking the SMART SOPs intelligent process design, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our keynote speaker, Mr. Jamal, for bringing those insight, for bringing those thoughts on RISA, SIPOC, and sharing the 5 critical checkpoints. So thank you so much, Jamal sir, for being part of it. And I would also like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed speaker, Mr. Vijay Sachdeva and Sumana Chakrabarti, for sharing your expertise here, starting from the litmus test to conveyor belt to behavioral change, and finally the SOP and workflow should go hand in hand. My thanks go to the organizers who are working behind the camera. So thank you so much for organizing this session. And last but not the least, to all the participants, to all the audience who are here with us and listening to us so patiently. We are grateful for all the participants. Thank you so much, everyone. Till the time we meet next time. Have a great day. Have a great
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you so
Thank
much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Vijay, and thank you, JHS team, for having us invited over. Thank you very much.
Likewise.